In the last video, we outlined the three branches of government and talked specifically about the legislative branch. So let's move on today and talk about the other two branches. Our executive branch is often seen as the top branch. That's because the head of state and the head of government are part of this branch. In the United States, the head of state and the head of government are the same person, the president, and we call this system a republic. Here in Canada, we are a constitutional monarchy. Currently, we have a queen who is officially our head of state, but she is way too busy being the queen of a whole lot of countries to be taking care of things here in Canada specifically. So she's represented by the Governor General, and in provinces, she's represented by the Lieutenant Governor. The responsibility of the Governor General is to represent Canada internationally, open Parliament, and give royal assent to laws. We're going to talk more about the laws later, but basically, if the Governor General doesn't sign a bill, it can't become a law, so royal assent is a big deal. But remember, the unwritten Constitution says that the Governor General will always sign it. So what's the job of the head of government then? Well, his or her job is to keep the country running smoothly. Remember, the role of the executive branch is to execute or enforce the laws. The head of government is the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the leader of the governing party. That's the party that got the most people elected to the House of Commons. He'll then appoint people from his party to be in his cabinet. Each cabinet minister has a specific area of responsibility known as the portfolio. The cabinet titles and responsibilities can change, but we usually have a Minister of Trade, a Minister of Culture, a Treasury Minister. The minister will have a staff that helps him or her ensure that the laws relating to that specific portfolio are being enforced. So for example, provinces are in charge of education, so the government of Alberta has an education minister who's part of the Premier of Alberta's cabinet. The education minister has a large staff known as the civil service. Civil servants are government employees, part of the bureaucracy. They make sure that all of the laws and programs relating to education are working. So it's the responsibility of the education ministry to decide what you learn and how you're evaluated. So you can thank them for having to study the three branches of government. Now, most cabinet ministers are chosen from the legislature. At the federal level, they usually come from the House of Commons. This relates to an important but confusing idea: responsible government. So what's so confusing about responsible government? Doesn't it just mean that the government's being responsible? Nope. Let me lay it out for you. In Canada, we follow the British parliamentary tradition that states the executive branch comes from the legislative branch. Huh? Isn't it supposed to be separate? Well, the way our system works is that our Prime Minister gets his job by being the leader of the group that has the most seats in the House of Commons. That leader then picks his cabinet from the legislative branch as well. They then have the responsibility of being part of the executive and legislative branches at the same time. Why? So that the executive branch, including the head of government, must always have the support of the elected legislative branch. We don't get to elect our Prime Minister, but if the Prime Minister can't get enough support from the people we did elect, then the head of government loses his job. And if that happens, that usually means we have to hold an election. Remember, the Prime Minister must be able to always lead the largest group in the House of Commons. It's a way of keeping the head of government from becoming too powerful. So does this make sense? Basically, the executive branch must respond to the wishes of the legislative branch, making them responsible to the elected officials of Canada, which in turn means that they are responsible to us, the voters. This is very different from the United States, which doesn't have responsible government. Again, remember, I'm talking about how the executive is chosen, not whether they're behaving responsibly. Instead, the American Constitution states that the United States is a republic, which means their head of state and the head of government is the same person and must be elected. They can't have a queen. After the president is elected by the people, she, hey, a girl can dream. Even though Canada's only ever had one female prime minister and the US has never had a female president, things can change. So anywho, her cabinet ministers cannot be part of the legislative branch. If they want to be part of the president's staff and they have a job in the legislative branch, they're going to have to quit. So when President Obama was elected in 2008, he invited Hillary Clinton to be his Secretary of State. She already had an important job as a senator, but had to quit that job in order to work with the president. We call this separation of powers because the levels of government are separate. Very different from Canada's parliamentary system. If the executive branch doesn't have the support of the legislative branch in the US, they still get to keep their job. But the president can't just do anything she wants. Remember, it's the legislative branch that writes the laws, so she's going to have to cooperate with the members of the legislative branch to get new programs going. Okay, now it's time to discuss the judicial branch. I know, it's a lot of information. The judicial branch interprets the laws and includes the independent courts. Usually we think of a judge enforcing the law, so wouldn't that mean they're part of the executive branch? Nope. Think about it. What does a judge do? They listen to arguments about what the offender has possibly done to break the law. Then the judge will look at the law and interpret whether the person has in fact broken that law. If the law is broken, the judge will impose a sentence, and if the prison sentence is warranted, then they'll hand that criminal over to the corrections department, which is led by the Minister of Public Safety, a member of the executive branch. Get it? As we've already said, it's very important for the judicial branch to be independent from the executive and legislative branches. We must have independent courts so that the people writing the laws and the people enforcing the laws can't influence the person who's interpreting the laws. The judge will make sure that the laws agree with the Constitution, not whomever happens to be Prime Minister at the time. And if we think a law is unconstitutional, we can have the Supreme Court take a look at it. The Supreme Court is the court that deals with the government. Another job of the Supreme Court is to deal with any appeals that have already been dealt with in lower courts. The Supreme Court is the highest court of appeals. If you lose an appeal to the Supreme Court, that's it. There's no other court to appeal to. So the Supreme Court doesn't deal with high-profile cases like mass murders or terrorists. Instead, they deal with constitutional issues. Wow, that was a lot. I'm betting you're probably going to have to go back and watch this again to get all those ideas on the different branches of government straight. It's okay. A lot of Canadian adults don't get this either.